Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to dive into two of the most powerful, most fundamental ideas in all of biology, heredity and evolution. We're going to explore how life passes its secrets from one generation to the next, and how that same life has changed over millions of years into the incredible variety we see all around us. It's really life's greatest story.
So let's start with a question that I bet every single one of us has asked at some point. Why do you have your mother's eyes? Or your father's smile? What's the secret sauce, the mechanism that passes these features down through the family tree?
Okay, now let's zoom out. I mean, way out. From something personal to a planetary scale. Why isn't there just one kind of animal or plant on Earth? How did our world become home to this mind-boggling diversity of life, from the tiniest little bacteria to the enormous blue whale? Well, the journey to answer both of these huge questions actually starts in a surprisingly quiet place. A monastery garden, way back in the 1800s. It starts with an Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel. We now call him the father of genetics because he was the very first person to really unlock the basic rules of life's blueprint. You see, Mendel's work was all about hereditary, which is just the scientific term for the process of passing biological traits from parents to their kids. You can think of it like a family inheritance, really, but instead of passing down money or property, parents are passing down a set of genetic instructions that literally shape the next generation.
Now, this is where Mendel's genius really kicks in. He didn't pick some complex animal to study. Nope, he chose the humble garden pea. And why was that so brilliant? Well, pea plants were kind of the perfect subject. They grow fast, they have tons of offspring, and, this is the most important part, they have several very clear either-or traits.
And that clarity was absolutely key. He zeroed in on 7 pairs of these contrasting traits. For instance, a pea plant was either tall or dwarf. There was nothing in between. The seeds were either round or wrinkled. This simple binary nature of the traits allowed him to spot patterns that literally everyone else before him had completely missed. So, through his thousands of experiments, Mendel figured out that for every single trait, an organism gets 2 factors, one from its mom and one from its dad. Today, we don't call them factors, we call them alleles. So for a trait like flower color, a pea plant has 2 alleles, which are basically 2 different versions of the instruction for that color. But here is the critical discovery. These alleles aren't always equal. Mendel found that some are dominant. That means they will always show their trait, even if only one copy is there. It's like a loud voice that just talks over the other one. And the other allele? That one's recessive. It's the quiet voice that only gets to be heard if both copies of the allele are the quiet, recessive kind. Okay, so we've got dominant alleles and recessive alleles. But how do they actually get combined and passed along? What are the rules of this genetic game? To figure that out, let's walk through Mendel's most famous experiment, because it shows these principles in action perfectly. He performed what we now call a monohybrid cross, which just means he was focusing on one single trait at a time, in this case, plant height. He started by crossing a pure-breeding tall plant with a pure-breeding dwarf plant. Now, in that first generation of offspring, every single plant was tall. It was like the dwarf trait had just vanished. But then, and this is the genius part, he let those tall plants pollinate themselves. And in the very next generation, poof, the dwarf trait was back. And it didn't just reappear randomly. Oh no. This is where Mendel's meticulous, almost obsessive counting paid off big time. He found this incredibly consistent pattern. When he looked at the physical traits, what scientists call the phenotype, there was a ratio of almost exactly 3 tall plants for every 1 dwarf plant, a 3-to-1 ratio. That's not a coincidence. It was a massive clue pointing to a hidden rule. So what in the world was causing this perfect 3-to-1 ratio? Well, the answer wasn't in what you could see on the outside. It was hidden in the genetic code, the genotype. While the plants looked like they were in a 3-to-1 ratio, their genes were actually in a 1-to-2-to-1 ratio. There was 1 pure tall, 2 hybrid talls, which were secretly carrying that dwarf allele, and 1 pure dwarf. This hidden genetic ratio was the key that unlocked the entire puzzle. And this incredible discovery led him to his first great principle, the law of segregation. It might sound a bit complicated, but the idea is actually quite simple. It just means that an organism's 2 alleles for any trait separate from each other when it makes its reproductive cells, its gametes. So each sperm or egg cell ends up carrying only one of the 2 alleles. It's a clean split. So Mendel gave us the rule book for how traits are passed on, but the story doesn't end there. Because you see, the process of inheritance isn't always a perfect copy-paste job.
Small differences, or variations, get introduced. And it turns out these variations are the essential raw material for all of life's incredible diversity.
But first, we need to draw a really critical line in the sand. There is a huge difference between inherited traits, the stuff that's coded in your DNA, and acquired traits, which are things you develop during your lifetime. Your natural eye color? That's inherited. But building big muscles from working out? That's acquired. And this is so important because only inherited traits can be passed on to the next generation and actually power the engine of evolution. And it is precisely these inherited variations that provide the fuel for evolution. This is the grand process that was so brilliantly explained by another giant of biology, none other than Charles Darwin, through his theory of natural selection.
Let's use a simple story to make this crystal clear. Imagine a population of red beetles just hanging out on some green bushes. Well, they stick out like a sore thumb to birds that want to eat them. But one day, just by random chance, a genetic variation produces a green beetle. Now, all of a sudden, this one beetle is perfectly camouflaged. It's way less likely to get eaten, so it survives long enough to have baby beetles and pass on that green gene. Now, fast forward over many generations, what do you think happens? The green trait becomes more and more common, simply because it provides a massive survival advantage.
And that, right there, is the core idea of natural selection. It's not a conscious choice. The environment, in our story, the green bushes and the hungry crows, is what selects which organisms have the best traits to survive and reproduce. It's survival of the fittest, in its purest form.
I mean, it's an incredible theory, right? But how do we actually know it's true? How can we be sure this grand story of change over time has really happened? Well, the evidence is all around us. It's written in the rocks, in our own bodies, and in the very code of life itself. First up, we've got fossils. You can think of these as snapshots from deep time. They're the preserved remains of ancient life, and they show us, without a doubt, that the creatures that lived in the past were very different from the ones alive today. They reveal a long history of change, of extinction, and of the emergence of totally new forms of life. Next, we can find clues right inside our own anatomy. Take a look at the forelimbs of a human, a bat, and a whale. Now, on the surface, an arm, a wing, and a flipper do very different jobs, right? Grasping, flying, and swimming. But if you look at the bone structure underneath, you find the exact same set of bones, just modified for a different purpose. These are called homologous organs, and they are powerful evidence that all three of us evolved from a common ancestor.
Now, let's contrast that with something called analogous organs. Think about the wing of a bird and the wing of an insect. They both do the same thing, they're for flying, but their internal structures are completely different. A bird wing has bones, an insect wing doesn't. This is what we call convergent evolution. It's a beautiful example of how totally unrelated species can independently evolve the same solution to a similar problem.
So, when you put it all together, you see this incredible interplay. Heredity is the mechanism that copies and passes down the script of life, sometimes with a few typos, which we call variations, and evolution, driven by natural selection, is like the director of this grand, unscripted play, shaping and editing that script over millions and millions of years into the amazing diversity of life we have today.
And that brings us to a final, really powerful thought. These processes, heredity, variation, natural selection, they aren't just ancient history. They are happening right now, in every living thing on this planet, and that includes us. So the big question is, what changes are we passing on? What evolutionary forces are shaping our species today, and what will humanity become tomorrow?